Right, here we are. Time for some AI mistakes again today. I'm Daniel Lemire, founder of AI Mistakes, and today we're going to talk about, did Anthropic just completely change the game? Large language models, chat. We've all been playing with AI. That's probably why you're here. But the question we're going to talk about today is, what does this new model from Anthropic mean for what the best tool choices are? What are the capabilities that they released this week? And how can we all benefit from the cool technology that all of these companies are releasing and working on? So today I want to start with introducing Claude, because we've not really talked about Claude in great detail here on the channel. I thought this would be a great opportunity for us to begin that discussion, talk a little bit about the background, what you can do with it, and then what's new with Claude 3. Is this a game changer? Does it really matter? Does it add value? Is it something we need to talk about? So Anthropic is one of the many companies that has been working very hard on building out the capabilities of these large language models. You would say that they're a startup, not unlike OpenAI. They have been deeply investing in this technology for quite some time, and they have many capabilities that they have been working on to bring for all of us to work on. As they've been evolving the technology, they too have upgraded the capabilities, iterating through Claude 1, 2, and now with the release of 3 this week. They've now augmented the capabilities of the model to do many important things around the reasoning, enabling vision, working on code generation, something that I really enjoy working with, and multilingual processing, because we are talking about a large language model. They are adding more and more distinct capabilities and features around providing language interaction and comprehension. They've introduced 3 models, and they have various different sizes, various levels of comprehension capability and cost. And I think that's an important trade-off that we have to make when we're deciding which of these models to use. They're classifying Haiku as their light and fast model. Sonnet is their hard-working, capable, but efficient model. And then Opus is the most intelligent, really hitting high on the benchmarks. It's also the most expensive option in terms of what you can use. They're touting their core feature set around it being a trustworthy solution. Obviously, they've got all of the necessary background done from a security perspective and have multiple different options from a cloud hosting provider capability. They have a 200K context window. That's been pretty consistent. Last year, they released that to much fanfare and a lot of excitement because they were the first to get there. And of course, now they have multimodal capabilities. Another key component of what they're offering is a low hallucination rate and a long document reliability. I think that's really important. In terms of what they've released with Claude 3, they put out a great blog post that really goes through this in detail. What we're talking about is a leveraged upgrade of the cost and capability. And so when we're talking about using this, if you are developing applications and leveraging the API, you'll want to start with the fastest model that is the least expensive to perfect your logic and how you're using that, and scale up to the larger model if that is really necessary for your capability. But my own personal experiences have been, depending on exactly the use case, you might only need that lowest tier option that's really fast. And let's not discount the value of speed, because that is what's required in the modern application development space for people to really love an application. That speed really does matter. The benchmarks are coming out very good. We'll talk about this a little bit more throughout the hour as we're discussing their capabilities. But just looking at the chart that they've released, and keep in mind that this is the chart that is released by Anthropic. We've seen some shenanigans in the past. I'm not saying that this chart is in any way, shape, or form misrepresenting the benchmarks, but I do want to caution you that a lot of times benchmarks are only so useful because they're provided in a very structured way, and the models can adapt to the training data, the information that they're intaking. And so they're not 100% of the story. We need to rely on other external data sets to really determine this. But I think we have some very interesting numbers here in terms of how good these models are representing. This benchmark is showing Claude 3 Opus as really outperforming on the undergraduate level knowledge, the graduate level reasoning, the grade school math, the math problem solving, multilingual math, code, reasoning over text, mixed evaluation, knowledge Q&A, and common knowledge. They've got the benchmark across all of these that they're representing in the screen. But notice how close some of these scores are. So I definitely think that this is a your mileage may vary situation, and you need to be testing these solutions to determine if this is really the right choice for you. My own personal experiences have varied over time with all of the large models. The experience with Gemini that I've had has been varied depending on the kinds of questions that I'm asking. Certainly with GPT-4, as they continue to tweak the model and make changes, I've certainly experienced the sort of laziness of the model in giving a good answer. And with Claude 3, there's been kind of a mix. I actually really personally prefer Claude. I've been using Claude 2 in my Perplexity search options. Perplexity being the search engine that I'm using basically for all of my research now, has an API that lets you choose which large language model will be used in digesting the links and research that it goes out and get. I really like the writing of Claude, and I've been very excited about what's happened with Claude 3 because I still do tend to prefer the answers that I get from it just from a prose perspective. And that's largely a personal preference. I wouldn't say that Claude 2 is better than GPT-4. And I do switch the model on occasion, but this week they've also updated their options. And we'll cover that a little bit later in the conversation. But back to the benchmarks. When you compare, say, for example, the undergraduate level knowledge, which I think is probably going to be the most frequently something you and I would interact at that level if we're asking questions and trying to do typical problem solving. If you see the score for Claude Opus, it's at 86.8 with 5-shot. And so that's basically laying out the prompt to say, this is what I want. Here are 5 examples of the answer that I want. Give me the answer in this format. It rated 0.4% better than GPT-4 and a couple of percent better than the Gemini 1.0 Ultra model, which is the best Gemini model that's available to everyone through Google's offering. They do have Gemini 1.5, which I just got access to this week, but I haven't had a chance to really play with it. So I don't want to go into detail in discussing that too much this week, simply because I'm not familiar with it. The other key bits of data that are important for you to see on the chart, because they've provided us with Open, Sonnet, and Haiku, basically we're able to do a direct comparison to the lesser models, right? Gemini 1.0 Pro coming in at 71.8, and even Haiku is coming in with a better score of that. So their fastest, least expensive model is coming in with better numbers across the board. So keep in mind that you may not need to have the best model for it to really deliver value for you. All of these models are accessible with an API and have a variance in cost. If you're building an application or leveraging this in any kind of at scale way, you may not need that highest level, but they're also claiming a really high score with their best model, Claude Opus 3. Now, we talked about speed a moment ago, and this is something that I want to call out as we go forward, but this is the big thing that I'm really fascinated by with the models. We've been talking about large language models largely since ChatGPT was released in November of last year. But there's been a lot happening in the visual space. And I think that this is really the emerging frontier for all of us, because in order for these models to really understand the world, they're going to have this image based experience so that they can describe images and understand scenarios that include the context of the imagery that's captured at, for example, an event or looking at a product. And so this vision capability is really essential. Now, up until this point with Claude 3, this hasn't been something that Anthropic was enabling at all. But now they have added this. So it's not just simply looking at an annotated document and understanding the text in the document. You're now able to actually give it a complex document. It can understand the flow of the document and the imagery that's in it, including visual formats, photos, charts and graphs, and technical diagrams. This is an essential upgrade for Claude. This is one of the main reasons that for me, continuing to leverage the capabilities in GPT-4V through ChatGPT has been really valuable, because sometimes a picture really is worth 1,000 words. Their capabilities are coming in very high, but they're already showing out of the gate here that their score for visual, at least on the very first score here, the math and reasoning, is identical to Gemini 1.0 Ultra. I do expect that 1.5 is going to be better than that, but you can see that they're hitting the top of the benchmark. You can also see from this benchmark, because it has all of the big players listed on here, that not everybody is good at everything. But again, back to the capability conversation, that may not be the most important thing. Now, this refusals chart here, I think, is really interesting. I have not encountered an incorrect refusal with Claude 2.1 on Perplexity. Full disclosure, I'm not going to Claude.ai and using Claude exclusively on a regular basis. Occasionally, when I'm writing something, I'll see what it says. I have a lot of different ways that I'm integrating and working with these tools, and really an embedded workflow where it's right where I need it is the most common scenario for me. But what's interesting is that the refusal is happening still. So that is a problem that is occurring. We've seen this really widely with GPT-4 on ChatGPT, and honestly, I'm pretty annoyed with it at this time, just consistently not doing what I've asked it to do, or pretending that it can't do something. That's always been a problem. We've had to remind it with some of the more advanced feature sets, but particularly with writing code. I've pretty much given up doing code in GPT-4 through ChatGPT entirely. If I'm writing code, I'm almost exclusively using Copilot now, because they've upgraded that experience to a greater degree, and it really, having it right where you're going to consume it is the best option as far as I can tell. But this refusal component is really important, and what I've seen already in some of the reactions are people are putting A and B comparisons of what you get out of ChatGPT versus what you're getting out of Claude 3, and the results are better simply because it's not refusing, or it's providing a more complete response. And that really plays into this improved accuracy data point, because we want to not only have it give a complete answer, but give a complete answer that isn't made up. And what we're consistently seeing is that as the models get larger, as you have more and more parameters in the model, the hallucinations are starting to go away. Um, and I think that this is an important trend that we're observing over the long term. We also are seeing an improvement in terms of long context. Now, I don't know if this is a byproduct of the size of the model or active development by the various programs that are building these capabilities. We saw a few weeks ago with Gemini's 1 million token capability that it was really coming back very good across those million plus tokens, giving an answer. And here we have a chart of Claude 3's performance in terms of the recall accuracy. Yeah, there's some slight green in here, but I think this is really impressive. And this is going to make things definitely more interesting when it comes to deciding exactly how you want to leverage these models. You can upload very large documents to use in the answer, and it will accurately consume those. And that's important, because so much of what we do is an in the moment kind of setup for us as individuals. Now, if you're at a larger organization that has lots of data and different ways that you can plug in that data, that may be less important to you, because you're not bringing that in through a data interface. But you and I doing a one-off query, this embedded capability for the context is really essential, because it means we can bring exactly what we want to the conversation and it will pull out exactly that relevant information. And they have this needle in a haystack test that they perform to identify how good a job it's doing at pulling that out. It's above 99% accuracy, which I think is absolutely amazing. And of course, they continue to work on improving the design and the responsibility elements that we've been talking about around using AI and doing so in a responsible manner. They are also being very competitive at the cost level, in terms of what you can do. This is a competitive rate. And again, depending on the size of the model that you need, this may or may not be something that's really essential for how you are using it. But the context window, while not the million that is offered with Gemini, the 200,000 is very large. And I think it's going to cover a significant majority of the cases that people want to use this. And then they've also given you the different size options. So some really cool things that are happening there. But let's keep talking about some of the things that are a part of this release from Anthropic. I had an opportunity to see an interview with the CEO of Anthropic recently, and they were having a pretty good conversation, some really interesting tidbits. The CEO is Dario Amodei, I think is how you pronounce it. And in the discussion, they were talking about this sort of the evolution of large language models and how we continue to grow the capability. And there's very clearly apparent patterns in how these models are continuing to improve in their performance. And when we talk about that performance level, it means that they can add additional feature set, but it also means that they are continuing to chase more and more parameters. Now, I haven't seen an official release in terms of the number of parameters, but the estimation of one of the folks that I consume a newsletter from is estimating this latest Claude 3 Opus model as coming in at 2 trillion parameters. We don't have specific numbers really for any of the most deployed models that we use every day from Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic are all estimated to be in the trillions of parameters, but we don't have a factual bit of information to inform that. But these are substantially larger, and that is why the compute industry is so important right now, because it is companies like NVIDIA that are providing the raw horsepower necessary to be able to build models that are simply that large. And of course, the thing that I'm most excited about is the vision capabilities. That really is the future, both in terms of creating things out of image-based models and video-based models and consuming that with the vision capability. There's a lot of application development that's happening in this space, and I think we're going to see some really wild things this year in terms of the vision capabilities. And, you know, look, I've got many years of information technology experience in my background, and a big part of my skill set has been looking at the screen, at what the system is doing, and being able to diagnose what is happening. We've already seen demonstrations where you can give an image to a large language model like a GPT-4 with vision capability, and it can even fix a problem. So if you're at home and you're like me, if you're the IT guy and all of your family or friends call you up and ask you, how do I fix this? I've actually been able to help people by giving them these tools to use for themselves. That doesn't mean I'm still not the guy that they call for help. But if you are getting a weird dialog box, if you're getting a screen or a message that you don't understand, you can simply take that snapshot and upload it to the model, and it will give you a really good answer. And in fact, look, it's no deep, dark secret. I've had the benefit of Google for a majority of my career as an IT professional. And honestly, I cannot remember what I did before I had the ability to use Google to look up the error. This is that and so much better, because there's no interpretation necessary. You can simply hand off the image and it figures out what to do. And even if it's not right, you can give it that feedback in the chat conversation and it will come back with a next thing to try. So this is really, I mean, for some people, this could be a major life-changing development, adding this vision capability where you can get the answer on your own in your own time without any kind of problem. It's really amazing. And we talked a little bit about the different models. The model usage is really important because in some cases, the speed really is more important. And in some cases, the quality of the answer is most important. Now we have more choices across the board for that. We've always had the open AI solution with the 3.5 versus 4 from an API perspective as soon as they released 4. And they've continued to improve the speed. And in some of the solutions that I've built, that speed is so essential to the outcome. And that's why these benchmarks matter, because not only can you understand what you're getting in terms of the speed by using Sonnet and Haiku, you're also able to understand what the quality of the answer is going to be with that faster model. And sometimes you need an answer more than you need the right answer. Oftentimes, when I'm working with these models, I'm doing some brainstorming, I'm doing some thought experiments. We've talked about the newsletter on the channel before. And if you are not getting the newsletter from me, let me just pop that in as a reminder. Drop by newsletter.ai-mistakes.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'm putting that out monthly and delivering these kinds of insights on a monthly basis through the newsletter and sharing additional information there. But when I'm writing the newsletter, because I write that myself, I'm still not at the point where I really want to just say, make a newsletter and let the AI handle it, because this is something that's very important to me. It's a point of pride. That's not to say I don't get help with grammar. I mean, look, I'm using it to improve my prose, but it's still coming out of my brain. Sometimes just getting a feedback mechanism in place is really valuable. And if you just need a second opinion on something real quick, these kinds of options are really great for integrating because you can choose the level. Now, what is interesting about the vision capability benchmarks here, I mean, look, the scores for the science diagrams is really good. But what's interesting is that Opus didn't perform the best on this test, and it also didn't perform the best on the chart Q&A. So just because it is the largest, most expensive model doesn't necessarily mean that the results are going to be better. And we're seeing this across the board with experience in benchmarks. There's been a number of sites and services that I've referred to in the past, both in the newsletter and here on the channel, where people are evaluating these models. They're doing blind tests where you could take an open model and put it up against a paid model like GPT-4, and people are rating the response that's coming back from the open source model as actually being better than what they're getting with something like a GPT-4. Now, that is not a scientifically based test. It's simply preferential. But sometimes impressions that we take away are really valuable and important. So don't just come at this and assume that the answer you're going to get from Opus will be better across the board than Sonnet and Haiku. That's a very important distinction. And this is where testing has got to be a part of the process. Again, if you're building an application or a capability that leverages these models on the back end, don't spend that extra money on day one. Get everything working, test it out, get an experience, get the feedback from your users just with the baseline model, because you might be delighted and surprised. And now you get the benefit of choosing when or where to upgrade the model in terms of how you're taking advantage of it. It also lets us really turn the crank fast. And I'm a huge fan of speed. It's something that has really changed my life as a technologist. I got heavily invested in DevOps in the early days because it made such a difference to my own experience as an infrastructure professional, as a developer, as an IT professional working with other people. Feedback is an incredibly valuable thing. And so don't underestimate the value of that, you know. And what's really cool is they've tried to balance those options across what they've released. So that's really cool. Now, the other thing that I'm really excited about, and this is not new functionality, but in relation to Claude, is that it can look at flowcharts and graphs and diagrams and understand it. One of the earlier problems that we had was if you gave GPT-4, for example, a document with a complex paragraph layout, sometimes there was a little bit of confusion about the flow of the text and how that came into being. These models now, because they have the visual component, can understand the context not only of the writing, but where it's positioned on the text and the diagrams that go with it. So that's really important. And I think we're going to see an absolute explosion of the use cases and the application of that. And I'm really excited about what's happened in the open space. I've been playing with tools on my own PC that allow me to turn on the PC camera and look at something and talk about what it sees. That's really powerful. And imagine in the not too distant future when all of this is available in a handheld device that you walk around. The Rabbit R1 comes out here in a few days. I didn't get in early enough to get my hands on one of those anytime soon, but I'm on the wait list and I'll get one eventually. I do think those kinds of capabilities with a camera that you can carry around with you and deploy in lots of scenarios is going to be tremendously valuable and useful. And the ability to leverage an API to do these kinds of functions is also really essential because you can bring it into your application and embed it for a fit to purpose utilization scenario. That is really where we are in 2024. The seamless integration into an existing system is really not to be underestimated. Across the board, what we're seeing is that putting it in the right place can really be transformative in terms of the user experience. And I'm a big advocate of user experience. Bringing a tool to the job in the right place is absolutely essential. So keep in mind that not only have they released this from a core utilization standpoint, but you can take advantage of it in your application if you want to build something with it. And this means that you can bring it in lots of different ways. You don't have to be a developer to benefit from the API inclusion, because now we've got Chrome extensions or other systems and tools that allow you to bring it into a variety of applications. So keep that in mind. Now, we've talked about system prompts in the past, and this is something that's very interesting to me because this concept of prompt engineering, or as I like to call it, natural language programming, understanding the ways that people are manipulating and driving results from the system is really essential. I want to call out, in comparison to some of the other system prompts that we have seen, this is, number one, a pretty terse system prompt. It is said that this was extracted from the system earlier on. I'm a little bit skeptical, to be totally honest with you. This looks like a system prompt. Is this the real system prompt? We think so. There's still conjecture. I'm still a little bit on the fence. This seems overly simple to me, but look, if they built this a really great system, maybe this is in fact the system prompt and it doesn't need to be complicated. But I love how simple this is. I love that it is very straightforward. And I really like that they have taken this approach around dealing with controversial topics. This is the real system prompt. Basically saying, carefully think through the objective. Don't downplay the content, but also be clear. Present multiple sides to the story. I really think that that is moving us in the right direction. I'm unmoved from my position that we need a knob to dial in the bias, because look, we have lots of political contention in the country, depending on who you most align with, and some of us move between sides on a regular basis. You can see their perspective. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but they are very clearly optimized to different scenarios. And not unlike the trolley problem, sometimes you have to make a choice, and not everybody's going to win by that choice. But I like that it's simple. And I really like that they are including that information in the explicit prompt, and that we could take advantage of this, pull that in, and get exactly the same result. I'm also an advocate for these prompts being actually released by the creator of the model. I think it's very important for us to understand the context that's being handed to the models going in. Yes, that is potentially fraught with some complexity, some undesirability. I can understand them not wanting to release this kind of information. This too was leaked. It was not something that Anthropic said, hey, here's our system prompt. But it's out there now, and you can see it here. If you compare this to the likes of what we're seeing with OpenAI's ChatGPT, it is much more convoluted and complex. Their capability also includes image generation. So a good portion of the system prompt for ChatGPT is actually for doing image generation, which Claude 3 doesn't have the capability in. I think we'll see some changes in that later this year, because in order for Anthropic to remain really competitive in the space, they're going to need that image generation capability. We've seen the likes of Midjourney making deals and having discussions with other providers. There's a rumor going around that Elon Musk's company X, formerly Twitter, has been talking to Midjourney for inclusion of image generation in their engine Grok. So there's definitely more to come in this space going forward, but I love how simple and straightforward this is. So that's really cool. Now we need to talk about the reaction that people are having to Claude 3. And look, I use X to find out what's happening. There is so many people on X that are sharing their stories and insights. I get to learn about some of the news items when things drop. It's usually on X that I find out about it. If not, it's a newsletter or someone I follow on LinkedIn. Social media as a way to detect and understand the latest things that are happening is really valuable to me. And I'm very careful about who I follow. If you're interested in that conversation, please feel free to follow me. I'm at Dan Lemire, and you can see the followers list. You can be as up to date with this information as I am. But I'd love for you to come here and get the analysis from me, because I love talking about these things and having these conversations. The first reaction I saw to Claude really was this idea that it was outperforming GPT-4 and Gemini. And I think that in looking at the scores, we've seen that from a benchmark perspective. But even beyond the benchmarks, I mean, you can look at the numbers and see which one is higher, right? But it's also experiential. And this is where we start to talk about some of the other benchmarks. In this screen here, we've got the benchmark from LMSys, their arena, where people are rating it, and they're giving their reactions to it. You see the span here across the board. Looking at the reactions, you've got GPT-4 that is topping out, and Bard comes in behind that with GPT-4 back in March performing differently. See, as the models evolve, you're also seeing different results. But as time goes by, look, we've got Claude 3 Sonnet coming in just below GPT-4. And then we've got Claude 3 Opus that is, in some cases, performing at the same level as GPT-4 Turbo. This ranking doesn't indicate that Claude 3 is outperforming GPT-4 Turbo in all cases, but it does give you an idea that it's definitely in the running. And if you compare that across the board to these other models, you can see that Google has continued to improve, because the score for Bard over time has made a big jump. Gemini 1.5 is a tremendous development, and they're not slowing down in what they release. The Anthropic team has really made some leaps here with what they've done with Claude 3. So I think that the praise that they're getting is absolutely warranted. And we're seeing this in multiple different ways. Some of the other folks that have shared things, they're saying this is definitely a competitor with GPT-4. There's no doubt about it. It is something that we need to pay attention to. And this is a specific retrieval generation example. They're showing here, again, you've got a red mark in one case where it didn't pick up the context window at the end, but still a 99% score. And that's outperforming both GPT-4 and Claude 2.1. This is a pretty dramatic development. Getting this level of accuracy with the text retrieval is incredibly valuable, because one of the contentions that we had really as ChatGPT was coming out, as we started to talk about it on my team working on innovation, the very first question was, well, can we trust it, right? And we said, it's pretty good, but it's not perfect. So getting to this level of correct and not having the hallucination in the text inclusion, the retrieval augmented generation, is really essential and important. So that's a major development that we don't want to miss that in this discussion at all. Now, we talked about what Anthropic already had on the site. This is their chart and evaluation of it. You can see that it's not, again, it's still not perfect, but These are really good numbers. And the amazing thing is that this is available today. We can go and use this right now. 200K token context. There's no gates here, right? Like I got access to Gemini 1.5 this week, which lets me do the million tokens, but there's a wait list for that. Not everybody has access to that today. You can go and use Claude 3 Opus right now. You can go sign up and start using it and playing with it and putting it to good use immediately. Some further background on the retrieval augmented generation. This is another example where they took and did this kind of test across other bits of information, leveraging data imports for stocks, so the RK funds, and then using that information to look it up and provide not just the data retrieval, but also doing that in a programmatical way so that you can take advantage of it in programming. And I think that's really the other big deal here with the development. The model is more adept from a conversation standpoint, not just in terms of language and understanding our human exchange, but also in terms of coding. Some of the other reactions, I really love to see what Ethan says. He's got this tweet that he shared earlier that was also echoed by Carlos Perez. Carlos has been in the industry for a while. I really love his deeper understanding of things because he's been in the ML space for quite some time, and he shares some really deep thought things. But when we look at what Ethan shared, just for context, we're talking about this kind of test where you have a PhD that has access to the internet and they are answering questions. So these questions given to someone that is an expert in the field using internet access is getting somewhere between 65 to 75%, right? And Claude is getting over 60%. When that same PhD doesn't have expertise in that domain, they're scoring in the range of 34%, and Claude is in that 60% range because Claude knows a lot about everything. So we're seeing another case where in real usage scenarios, Claude is able to give a better answer than someone that has spent literal years becoming an expert in this kind of information. So this is really good for those of us that don't have expertise in everything and really need help to get the right answer without having to spend decades learning how to do it. So some incredible benchmarks and developments here. And so at this point, you might be asking, okay, that's great. How do I start using this? You can go to Claude's website. They have if you go straight to Anthropic, you can click on the Try Claude button that they have right there. They also have the Get API Access button, but both of those are going to lead to the interface. I signed in with my Google account, and here you can upload a document. They do have limits on how far you can go in terms of size, and they do have a limit to how many Claude Opus requests that you can do in a day without having a subscription account. But they have the option to upgrade to Claude Pro right here. And if you click in the subscribe now, they'll give you the option to upgrade. It is $20 a month, and it includes the same kind of things that we've come to expect from the likes of ChatGPT, exclusive access to the model across the board. And if that's not palatable to you, you have the API option. And if you log in and set up your account, they're actually giving you a $5 free credit claim. So if you want to start working with this right now, you can do that. $5, I'm not really sure how far that's going to get you, but it will give you an opportunity to play with it without having to get yourself committed to something over the long term. It'll give you an opportunity to evaluate it and play with the API so you can actually embed it into your application and start using it. There's a couple of other options available. I mentioned many times on the channel that I'm a heavy user of Perplexity. They have provided the upgrade to Claude 3, so Claude 3 is there. Now, the caveat with Claude 3 in Perplexity versus 2.1, when we were using Claude 2.1 in Perplexity, that was you could do it all day, every day. Because Claude 3 includes different models, the way that Perplexity has handled that right now is you get 5 responses on Opus, and then it downgrades to Sonnet. So The good news, bad news there is it's the first five. So you can't save them up and use them for later in the discussion. It just happens to be the first five interactions. You're getting Opus and then you're getting Sonnet the rest of the time. That's the good news, bad news. You can, of course, play with it and tweak it, but you can see that I'm using that option because I tend to prefer Claude in most cases for use with Perplexity. The last option I'll share with you is we do have Poe.com. This is yet another option. And I actually haven't brought this up on the channel at all, but there's a number of options in here. And I have not spent any time with Poe. A few of the folks that I follow and learn from have recommended this. So I do want to bring it up. They have they have the various mobile apps, of course. You have the ability to create bots and assistants inside, but they are providing this option to upgrade your account. And in your settings, you can subscribe to Poe, and it's reasonably priced. It's comparable, but inside of the options here, they actually have a whole bunch of options, and you get access to both GPT-4 and Claude 3 Opus with your Poe subscription. So if you're finding that you're bouncing around a lot, this might not be a bad option to consider, because you can jump around and leverage the different capabilities. There are so many different options across what you have in here. They're also providing the open source option. So if you want to play with Mistral, maybe you want to be working with the Google models like Gemini Pro, and of course Mistral and Mixtral. They've also got the image generation options here. So if you're looking for one solution that's going to solve it for you, this is probably something you should give some consideration and thought to. It is limited, so it's not, if you go to Anthropic and you do the $20 deal with them, you're going to get probably a lot more than the credits that you'll get through something like Poe. But don't discount that could be a great solution for you. So with that's the material I wanted to cover today. I'm really enjoying working with Claude 3. I see a number of you are on the live today. I want to give an opportunity for y'all to ask questions if you have anything in particular that you'd like to ask. We continue to play with all of the content that's out there. Anytime I'm building a presentation, I'm working with Gamma. I'm taking advantage of Copilot. I'm using all of these tools and constantly rating them against each other to find what makes sense. And it's kind of interesting how over time I get different answers. This week, Copilot was kind of stodgy and difficult. Earlier in the week, I had some trouble with ChatGPT giving me a good answer. And, everybody is aware of the situation with Gemini. But earlier today, I was trying to look through my email with Gemini, and it wasn't searching my email. It told me it didn't have access to do that. So there's that problem that we've seen where there's the hesitation, or it just doesn't know that it has a capability. And I think this is a challenge that we're going to see. I was thinking about it when I was watching the discussion with the CEO of Anthropic earlier today. Dario was talking about, observing how things are evolving over time. And the thought that occurred to me was, when we're dealing with these very complex systems, as a human, we make mistakes. It's part of the reason I've named it AI mistakes, because we make mistakes using the AI. The AI make mistakes in giving us answers. And sometimes we let those mistakes deter us from making forward progress. And a part of me wonders if we're ever going to be completely rid of that kind of a situation, because there's a part of me that thinks that even the most advanced, most intelligent representation that we can make is not going to be completely mistake-free, because of the way that the learning occurs, the way that it understands and interacts with what's going on around it. Who knows if we'll ever get an answer to that? We are seeing a major drop in hallucinations, so that situation is getting better. It's not completely gone, but the thing that I want you to take away from these kinds of releases and evolutions is, one, the technology is constantly improving, and there are many companies that are working to improve it. But two, don't be afraid to get your hands dirty with these, and you're going to make mistakes in applying this, whether you're coding it, whether you're building new solutions, whether you're trying to get it to do something that's a little bit more advanced, this idea of it's an intern that's going to mess things up from time to time, I think is a very good mental model for working with these. But I'm consistently surprised on an almost daily basis with the quality of answers that I'm able to get out of these various models and the incredibly complex things that you can do. I had a great conversation with a colleague actually over dinner last night. We were talking about the state of the world of data science and how all of that field is constantly evolving, especially in the context of these generative AI models that are more and more capable all the time. I think the data science space is absolutely being impacted by this because it's empowering people with less familiarity with machine learning and data science practices. The model can do a lot of that work for you if you give it the data file. And oftentimes, it'll even make suggestions on things that you could do, patterns that it recognizes. My favorite still is the Monte Carlo simulation because the amount of effort it used to take to set something like that up. You can go into Chat GPT and ask it to do a simulation and it's done. You don't have, it's not hard. And the answers are absolutely incredible. So it's been fun meeting with you today. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have questions, don't hesitate. Drop me a comment, drop me a line, sign up for the newsletter, give us a like if you're having a great time, and go make some mistakes. We'll see you next week.